You ever notice the cruelest part of chasing success is that the harder you grip the finish line, the more your body and mind start to choke? You think anxiety will push you forward, but it actually eats your focus, ruins your decisions, and turns your life into a performance you can never win. And then you swear the problem is you, when the real problem is your relationship with results. In this video, I'm going to rip open one psychological paradox people quietly worship. They treat outcomes like oxygen, like proof of worth, like permission to feel safe. Then they wonder why they can't breathe. We're going to examine how impatience contaminates effort, why the mind goes into survival mode when you demand certainty, and how that survival mode quietly sabotages love, work, money, and identity. No motivational posters, no soft coaching, just the uncomfortable mechanics of what you've been doing to yourself. Let me start with something you already recognize: the feeling of refreshing a message thread, the urge to check the bank balance, the compulsion to Google, am I doing it right? The constant dread of waiting for the moment when life finally confirms that you matter. Most people don't call it fear. They call it being ambitious. They call it caring a lot. They call it working hard. But underneath, it's the same old toxin, the need to lock in results now, because uncertainty feels like danger. Here is the paradox. The more you focus on results, the more you recruit anxiety into your body. And anxiety does not create better performance. Anxiety creates shorter routes, poorer thinking, and desperate behavior that looks like effort but functions like sabotage. When you're obsessed with the finish line, you become less capable of doing the boring, precise, repetitive work that actually produces the finish line. Your mind stops being a tool and starts being a landlord. It moves in, it controls the rent, it demands immediate satisfaction, and you pay with your attention. Now let's talk about one of the most common arenas where this paradox shows up: freelance work, creative labor, any job where you trade your skill for money and respect. Imagine a new freelancer, fresh, excited, full of potential, but terrified. Their fear is not "I want to grow." Their fear is "I might fail, and then I'm nothing." So they decide the only way to survive is to get clients at any cost. They accept unreasonable revisions. They agree to work for free just to keep the conversation warm. They say yes to requests that ruin the structure of their deliverable. A client asks for 10 changes, and they dutifully do 10, even though each change drags them further from their own process. They call it dedication. They call it service. But psychologically, what's happening is simple. Their desperation makes them cheap to themselves. And the market can smell that. Not with magic, with patterns. When someone is eager to please, it signals low value. It signals they will tolerate disrespect. It signals they will bleed energy instead of setting boundaries. People don't just buy your work, they buy the experience of dealing with you. If you act like you'll collapse if they don't approve of you, you teach them to treat you like an option, not a professional. The hidden self here is brutal. You're not only trying to get paid, you're trying to get relief. You want the anxiety to stop. You want certainty. You want the message from the client that says approved so your nervous system can finally unclench. That's why your effort becomes a hostage situation. Your work stops being an expression of competence and becomes a frantic bargaining attempt with fate. Contrast that with the experienced freelancer. They're not colder, they're clearer. They choose clients instead of begging for attention. They set terms up front. They define revision limits. They negotiate scope. They say no without making it personal. Not because they're arrogant, but because they understand a law most people refuse to learn. Your process is not a suggestion. Your process is the container that protects quality. If you abandon your container, your quality leaks out. If you chase results by sacrificing process, you get the worst of both worlds: stress now and collapse later. This is where the poisonous distinction matters. There are two kinds of effort. One is effort to do the work well. The other is effort to seize the outcome. Those two look similar from the outside. Both people are busy. Both people are working. But internally, the first type is calm focus. The second type is craving. Craving makes you negotiable. It makes you reactive. It makes you easy to manipulate. And once you become easy to manipulate, you start calling it being helpful. Let me give you a metaphor because your mind loves pictures. Imagine an archer. A real archer doesn't stare at the bullseye like it's a god. They stare at the target while aligning the body, the breath, the tension, and the release. The process is everything: the grip, the draw, the aim, the moment the arrow leaves. Now imagine a beginner who can't stop looking at the center of the target. Their eyes lock there, their hand trembles, their breath becomes chaotic. They start holding back, then overcorrecting, then yanking the shot. Their arrow misses. Then they blame their skill. But the actual problem is that their attention has been hijacked by outcome fixation. Their effort turns into panic. That's what happens when you treat results like the only proof of safety. The moment your mind decides the outcome is life or death, you stop doing precision. You start doing damage control. And damage control never creates excellence, it creates survival. So when I say the more you chase results, the more you suffer, I'm not talking about laziness, I'm talking about contamination. Your effort can be sincere and still be infected. You can work hard and still be undermining yourself because you're working hard to escape anxiety, not to build skill. Let's go deeper. Why does this paradox exist? Why does outcome fixation kill performance? Because it hijacks your brain into survival mode. And survival mode has one job: reduce threat. It doesn't care about long-term mastery. It doesn't care about creativity. It doesn't care about building a reputation. Survival mode cares about immediate relief. It triggers urgency. It narrows your attention. It makes you overreact to small signals. It turns every delay into danger. When your mind thinks, if I don't get it now, I'll lose everything, then every ordinary task feels unbearable. Writing 2 pages becomes painful. Making cold outreach becomes humiliation. Waiting for feedback feels like torture. So you start searching for shortcuts. You want the world to reward you immediately so you don't have to feel uncertainty. And your shortcut thinking makes you skip foundational steps. Learning, refining, practicing, testing, failing safely. People call that being efficient, but it's not efficiency. It's denial of the process. It's refusing to accept that skill grows slowly. It's refusing to accept that trust takes time. It's refusing to accept that love and money follow patterns, not wishes. When you try to force results early, you create distorted outputs, sloppy work, desperate communication, unstable relationships, and money decisions driven by panic instead of strategy. There's a construction version of this too. Picture a builder who's obsessed with seeing the finished house. They want the celebration now, so they rush the foundation. The foundation is concrete hidden underground. Nobody claps when you pour concrete, but without it, nothing holds. When the builder skips careful footing and reinforces too late, the structure collapses right after the almost done stage. It's not that the builder didn't work, they worked. They were just working on the wrong layer while their anxiety tried to satisfy a fantasy timeline. Now let's bring this into specific life scenes, the ones you've lived through. Example 1. The freelancer who sells their soul due to fear of scarcity. They accept any client, any demand, any revision because they can't tolerate silence. They interpret silence as rejection. They interpret rejection as identity death. So they become what I call a bargain worker. They train clients to think that your value is flexible. Then they wonder why they never get respect. Respect is not a gift. It's a response to consistent boundaries and consistent quality. And notice the trap they fall into mentally. They think, if I just keep being easy, they'll value me. But psychology shows something else. When you chase validation, you provide evidence of low power, and low power invites exploitation. Not always, but often enough that you should stop blaming bad luck and start asking what signals you broadcast under stress. What's worse is that you start believing the story that you're a good person. You're not a good person. You're a scared person trying to buy safety. That's a different moral category. One creates boundaries and trust. The other creates compliance and resentment. Example 2. Job applicants enslaved by approval. This one is common in interviews and applications, especially for people who grew up learning that the safest identity is obedience. They show up in the interview with one goal: get hired. Not to find alignment, not to test fit, not to offer value, just to earn the stamp. So they say everything they think will sound safe. I can do anything. I'll do whatever you need. Salary can be whatever. I'll try my best. And they think they're being humble, but psychologically, humility is not self-erasure. Humility is grounded confidence without ego games. Self-erasure is panic. Self-erasure is the willingness to trade identity for acceptance. Employers do not want a servant. They want a collaborator who can evaluate the environment and decide if it's worth the energy. A strong candidate focuses on process. They research the company deeply, they prepare concrete solutions, they discuss how they'll deliver, and then they negotiate terms like a professional. They don't ask for rescue, they offer value. Here's the hidden mechanism. When you act like you need the job more than they need you, you lower the perceived leverage of your labor. Companies respond to leverage. They test you, they probe your limits, they watch how you handle discomfort. And if you crumble, they'll assume you'll comply forever. Then you'll be trapped later, resentful, underpaid, and shocked that nothing changed. Of course, nothing changed. You trained the system to treat you as replaceable. Example 3. Love. The place where outcome fixation turns into emotional control. This is where people do the most damage while pretending they're just affectionate. If you like someone and you need them to like you back with certainty, you start acting like a hostage negotiator. You text too often, you monitor, you interpret delays as punishment, you try to stabilize your anxiety by controlling their response. Your messages become a metronome of your fear. Your mood depends on their tone. Your peace depends on whether they viewed your message. This is what I mean by the force of attachment producing the force of rejection. The more you pull, the more they feel pushed. Not because they hate you, because humans don't want to be responsible for someone else's emotional survival. People don't want to be an emotional oxygen tank. They want to be partners in a life, not a cure for your loneliness. When you treat their attention as your livelihood, you become heavy, you become unpredictable, you become a stress generator. And when love is no longer about shared growth, but about managing your anxiety, the relationship starts to rot from the center. And the most painful truth is that you might not even realize you're doing it. You might genuinely think you're romantic. You might think you're caring deeply, but your behavior reveals the real motive, certainty. You want to guarantee that you matter. You want the other person to cancel your fear. That motive is not love. It's emotional dependency dressed up in soft language. Now let's talk about the hidden self's terror of process. Why do you hate process? Because process is boring. Process is repetitive. Process has long stretches where nothing happens and you can't measure progress in obvious numbers. Process requires you to tolerate silence. It requires you to keep investing without instant proof. Most people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of ambiguity. They can handle being bad. They can't handle being uncertain. The silent season of training is the scariest part. The part where your body is changing but you can't see it. The part where your skills are forming beneath the surface but you don't get applause. In that phase, your brain starts demanding external confirmation, and then comes the treachery. You mistake lack of visible reward for lack of value. You dig up the seed to see if it sprouted. You break the ground every time you want reassurance. You sabotage the very thing you're trying to grow. This is why so many people stay stuck at amateur level. They quit right before the invisible root system takes hold. There's a famous image, a bamboo plant that takes years to grow roots under the soil before it shoots up. No one claps while roots form. Most people can't survive that invisibility. They need constant applause. They need immediate feedback. They need the shortcut of a visible win to keep them emotionally alive. So they chase quick results that don't compound. They switch projects constantly. They move on after minor friction. They keep the cycle of starting over because starting over creates the illusion of progress without enduring the painful middle. Now here's the moment where you need to stop and feel uncomfortable. Ask yourself honestly, are you working to build skill, or are you working to calm your fear of not having skill? Are you training, or are you bargaining? Are you creating, or are you begging for external validation? The hidden self knows. It always knows. It just lies to protect your ego. So, how do you reprogram this? You don't need a new motivational quote. You need a new structure. You need a new philosophy of success, a new measurement system, a new publishing approach, and a new boundary practice that protects the process from being strangled by irrational demands. Let's start with a philosophy that sounds simple but is psychologically radical. Success is one day done correctly, not one day won. Not the day you get the contract, not the day you win the argument, not the day you receive praise. That day is a celebration. Celebrations are short. Success is the repetition that precedes the celebration. So ask yourself a better question. Not, did I win today? But did I complete the process today? Did you do the 2 hours of work? Did you make the calls? Did you follow the plan even when nobody noticed? Did you keep the training consistent even when your mind wanted to quit? Did you do the boring part with dignity? When you shift from outcome worship to process addiction, you stop treating your identity as dependent on the future. You become loyal to your own standards. And that loyalty creates calm. Because if your performance is under your control, you cannot be emotionally destroyed by randomness. Others can ignore you, markets can fluctuate, people can delay, but you can still complete your craft. Here is the deeper psychology. The mind becomes unshakable when you detach emotion from outcome and attach emotion to controllable action. If you cannot control the response, you stop using response as your measurement of worth. You measure worth through effort with standards. That's how you become hard to manipulate. Now we move to a tactical system, because philosophy without metrics is just pretty thinking. In life and business, there are only two categories of metrics: output and input. Output metrics are what already happened: revenue, profit, how many people liked you, how many contracts closed, weight loss on the scale, the visible results. You cannot change them directly in the moment you're looking at them. Staring at output to soothe anxiety will only produce suffering. You're bleeding time because you want control where there is none. Input metrics are the actions that predict future output. Calls made, messages sent with quality, proposals written, pages produced, hours trained, calories consumed, research conducted, prototypes built. These are the variables you can control today. They create the future like seeds create growth. The difference between winners and losers is not intelligence. It's what they obsess over. Losers stare at output and cry because output is delayed and emotionally loaded. Winners stare at input and work because input is actionable and honest. Input is a conversation with reality. Output is a verdict you only read later. So stop making goals that are emotionally shaped like gambling. If you set, I need to make 100 million, you are setting an outcome target that you can't control. You're then forced to chase it through shortcuts. Instead, set goals that define behavior. I will meet 50 clients is not just a number, it's a commitment to the activity that creates the possibility of deals. You might not like that because it requires patience, but patience is the price of real results. There's a cause and effect law here, not a motivational slogan, a mechanism. When you increase the right input consistently, output eventually changes. You don't need to beg the universe, you need to follow the process. Now, there's a third layer, publishing the draft version instead of hiding until you feel ready. People obsessed with results are terrified to show early work. They want to be perfect before anyone sees. But perfectionism is not quality. It's fear of judgment. And when you hide, you deprive the market of evidence. You deprive yourself of feedback loops. You stay stuck in the silent season, but you refuse to send signals. So do the opposite. Create small versions and publish them while they're still imperfect. Let the world see the direction. Let evidence accumulate. If you're a designer, don't wait for clients to appear. Create personal projects and post them. If you want to do marketing, write sharp analysis about markets, about behavior, about what people do and why it works. If you want to attract someone, express your taste in the way you live daily, the way you treat strangers, the way you handle commitments, the way you remain consistent when nobody is watching. These small versions are not begging, they are bait for opportunity. They demonstrate value without requiring emotional hostage negotiation. People don't trust claims, they trust evidence. Publishing drafts turns your anxiety into data. It turns your ego from a fragile statue into a working instrument. But even the best process system fails if your boundaries are weak. So now we go to the fourth layer. Art of boundaries, the filtering grid of the strong. If you want to focus on process, you must protect it from nonsense.